Well, let's just talk about this too before we get into the debate, because it's going to be interesting to see if Elizabeth Warren addresses this. Elizabeth Warren has yet to come out with a version of her Medicare for All plan. She has signed up to support Bernie's bill, but also signed up to support other bills that are not Medicare for All in the context of how Bernie's bill defines it, nor are they for all in even like the colloquial way in which you define it. And there's some polling out today showing that like 35% of Democratic voters who are in favor of compromise are supporting Elizabeth Warren. A lot of those people, people who want less compromise. Among those who prefer politicians to stick to their positions, Sanders' top choice, 26%. And so this maybe should not come as much of a surprise, but there was an interview with the odious David Axelrod, interviewed Harry Reid. And this is what Harry Reid had to say about his perspective. And I think the Axelrod is setting this up as, look, isn't going to be supporting Medicare for All a liability? Isn't that going to be a liability in the election? And I get some polling that refutes that notion, but that's the way he sets this up. And Harry Reid has an interesting perspective on whether he thinks that that position is immutable by Elizabeth Warren.
There is a concern as well that's expressed by some establishment Democrats that she is too far left.
I think that's let's just wait. For example, Medicare for All, I asked me, how do you feel about that? I said, I think what we need to do first is let's make sure Obamacare is strengthened again. Republicans have done everything they can to hurt it. Let's strengthen it. We almost got the public option the first time. That's as good as Medicare for All anyway. And so
that's not what she's saying, though.
Well, but I think you give her some time. I think that she's not in love with that. I think you'll wait and see how that all turns out.
So you think she's more pragmatic than...
Oh, I know she's pragmatic. Just wait.
Okay, so, I mean, to be clear, Harry Reid is saying he has a perspective and that he believes Elizabeth Warren is sharing that perspective. And the question, maybe he's just speculating, but Harry Reid is the type of guy who can't quite keep secrets. So, I think that is something to keep in mind. Now, like I say, 35% of Democrats who want someone to compromise on these things, they are the biggest cohort of those people to support a specific candidate, Elizabeth Warren. So for some, it may not be an issue. For other people, it may be more of an issue going into this. I mean, I don't know why Harry Reid offered that. That seemed like a very specific offer.
I don't have an answer. It's speculation, and then I actually have a slightly different view about the compromise point. But the thing that's funny about Harry Reid is I think he's very close to Elizabeth Warren, but he actually has some closeness to some people in the Sanders campaign. So I'm wondering, like, in some ways, I'm like, who is he trying to make mischief for here by saying that is interesting to me. But
let me just, in terms of the question, in terms of the question of Medicare for All, as to whether the premise that Axelrod sets out, or at least as he articulates with Democratic establishment, as if he doesn't believe that. The question is Medicare for All a liability in a general election? And the polling on this is really interesting because so much of it is how you present the question to people. And there's really a fascinating dynamic. So here's this question. Do you support, and this is from the YouGov Blue poll that I think, not sure, I think YouGov Blue. Do you support or oppose a, quote, Medicare for All healthcare system where all Americans would get their health insurance from the government? Strongly support 33%, somewhat support 18%, don't know is 9%. So you have 38% somewhat or strongly oppose, and you have 51% support or somewhat support. And then it says, would you support or oppose a national Medicare for All plan if you heard that it would require 180 million Americans to move from private insurance to the Medicare for All plan? This is the, sort of a Republican frame of this. It would require 180 million Americans to move from private insurance to the Medicare for All plan, but
some Democrats frame it that way too.
And some Democrats frame it that way too.
I have to miss my Oscar?
But it is but it is also the case that at least on any given year, 25% of people lose their private insurance thing and have to move to a different private insurance or none. So in that instance, when you frame it that way, things become a little different. It only has 38% support, whereas it has 44% against. So when you present the question that way, the numbers change. But this is what's fascinating. When you ask the question like this, where you give the whole story, would you support or oppose a national Medicare for All plan after hearing these two arguments? Some say it would require 180 million Americans to move from private insurance to the Medicare for All plan. Others say that people don't actually love their insurance companies, they love their doctors. And under Medicare for All, you would always have health care even if you are fired or switch jobs, and you would be able to go to any doctor you want. Hearing these two arguments, would you support or oppose Medicare for All? Now remember, when we just did the do you support or oppose Medicare for Health, Medicare for All health plan, it got 51% support. When you ask the question the way that they just did, where they present both arguments, it actually gets 52% support. It goes up.
And they're still bearing the lead, which is that it's free at point of service.
Free at point of service.
That is a pretty big lead to be buried. I agree.
It's a big lead to be. Now, again, another right-wing talking point. Would you support or oppose a national Medicare for All plan if you heard that it would require most Americans to pay more in taxes? Well, 46% somewhat or strongly oppose, and 41% would strongly support or somewhat support. So it polls badly there. But then, if you're presented with this question, would you support or oppose a national Medicare for All plan after hearing these two arguments? Some say it would require most Americans to pay more in taxes. Others say while taxes would technically go up under Medicare for All, Americans would pay no private insurance premiums, copays, or deductibles. Instead, you would pay a premium to the government that is less than what you pay for health care now, and you would wind up with more money in your pocket overall. Hearing these two arguments, would you support or oppose? Well, then it shoots back up to 50% would support strongly or somewhat. And only 35% would somewhat or strongly oppose. I mean, so the pathway to making this argument to people and having it be a net positive for you in the general election is there. So the idea that it's a liability to maintain this position in the general election is a fraudulent one. From people who simply have some type of motivated reasoning about this.
Ideology all the way.
Ideology, transactional interests, they want, maybe Medicare for All is problematic just from abroad. I mean, there's a whole host of things, but whatever it is not accurate to say that supporting Medicare for All in a general election, if you argue the two most basic premises, that you're going to be able to have access to health care and your doctors that you have now, and it's going to be net positive in terms of savings for you at the end of the day, those two things are very simple, arguments to make. And if they're made, then people respond in a positive way.
So then the question becomes, why did she leave herself that wiggle room on Medicare for All?
I mean, I think because she wants that wiggle room.
Like, if not to win the general, who is she thinking about?
Well, I don't know that she subscribes to, that polling there. I think to a certain extent, people leave their, a wiggle room in the general because they feel like maybe they need to tack to the right. That doesn't necessarily mean that she will, but it's quite clear relative to, let's say, Bernie, that she's leaving open wiggle room, whereas he's saying no wiggle room.
I think she just clearly doesn't, objectively, I think does not have the same commitment level to that specific set of policies. And I think it also reflects in how she's going to approach, maybe not even the general. I think governance. I think what she's going to come to the table with and how she views negotiation. And I think that, she can definitely excoriate people, but I think she does have a much more inside bureaucratized view of things than Sanders does.
It also seems fair to mention that her daughter works in the private health industry.
Well, I think her daughter will do okay if she becomes president. I know. That's possible, but
Sure, but she's got those ties. She doesn't necessarily view the private health industry as the enemy of the people in the way that Bernie does.
I think.
I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, maybe she does. I don't know.
Culture matters. If Bernie's kids worked for the private health insurance industry, disown them.
It's possible. All right. We get.